I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
So we have Jakob Hanschu here for a discussion of, just a brief discussion of what he's doing this year for the Maurin Academy. Last year he did the Marx Reading Group, and he's going to continue that, but it's going to look different, and I think you guys will be interested. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Jakob before, I thought, first of all, Jakob, I'd ask you just to tell a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Lori, for having me on to talk about this course. I'm Jakob Hanschu, like she said. I'm the vice president and board member for the Maurin Academy. Lori and I go way back, I guess, to when I was like 19, a student at K-State studying anthropology and geography, got into some political and social philosophy. Under her guidance, read a bunch of great books together. I ended up going on to get a master's in critical theory and politics at the University of Nottingham as a Fulbright scholar, and then also earned a master's in sociocultural anthropology from Washington University in St. Louis. My interest is really kind of in a combination of like things people value and then why they value those things. So combining history with anthropology or sociology, and really looking at how these things come, I guess, manifest in like the material world. So when I was at Washington University in St. Louis, I was looking at drainage infrastructure in the Midwest, especially Iowa. And that's a great example of, this whole landscape ultimately is a manifestation of a particular kind of value related to agriculture, related to even, things like disease, elimination, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what led me to lead the Marx Reading Group, which I led. I think we did, I should have counted before this, like 18 or 19 sessions last year, from February to November. And in that group, we read Capital very slowly, but very intensively, sometimes covering like, 3 or 4 pages in a session. And I offered line by line commentary from myself, but also working from works by Moish Postone, David Harvey, and then Michael Heinrich. So it was a really great deep dive into Capital Volume 1, which is, one of, if not the most important of Marx's works. And so I guess that's kind of my general background. And then that leads to this upcoming course in 2024, which is on Marx's works on non-capitalist societies.
I want to know a little bit more about your plans for this year, but I just wanted to say, I attended most of your sessions from last year, and I really liked that, and it gave me, quite a good solid. I know we'd done it once before in a reading group, gotten through some of the same material, not quite as much. But this really solidified it for me. So like, I really appreciate the fact that you're doing this. And yeah, I'm hoping you can let people know kind of how things are going to change in the new year, and what kind of topics you're going to be looking at.
Yeah, so the reading group is playfully called Reading Marx with Jakob Hanschu, after the popular Reading Capital with David Harvey. We have disclaimers that, my beard isn't as awesome as David Harvey's and things like this. So the 2024 edition of the reading group, like I said, it's going to switch from this kind of really intensive reading of one text, Capital Volume 1, to kind of more I don't want to say broad necessarily, but what we're going to do is look at Marx's writings on non-capitalist societies from the 1840s, so relatively early, the manifesto, the German ideology, and even earlier than that. The earliest one we have is, I think, from 1842, which is debates on the theft of wood, which is a kind of obscure piece that not a lot of folks I think know about, but it's quite interesting, and I think more folks should know about it. So we'll start all the way from there, all the way to the end of Marx's life. So after Capital, after 1867, what was he doing? We don't have any real complete texts besides letters and then some shorter pieces, but no book length things. But in the 1880s, Marx was really concerned with some of these non-capitalist societies, not in and of themselves. He wasn't, doing ethnology or anything like this, but how this kind of factored into what he'd written and how he was thinking about capitalism later in his life. So we're going to try to cover that whole stretch. We had kind of an intro session on January. I'm going to forget what day that was now. On the January 10th. And then here on the 24th, we're going to be getting into the manifesto. That's what we're going to start with. So we're going to read selections of an array of texts, and then I'm going to try to pair each of these primary sources from Marx with a case study example, whether conceptual or empirical. So, for example, in the Communist Manifesto, some of Marx's language talks about the power of capitalism to break through all these barbarian elements of civilizations and really bring these folks to a stage of enlightenment, this kind of very Eurocentric evolutionist type language. So with this, we're going to pair some more recent works on accelerationism, right? And then when we talk about the German ideology, we might pair, something like that Darwin wrote about kind of the stages of social evolution. And then we're going to move through that to some additional texts. He's got some letters on India. So Marx was like the foreign correspondent for the New York Tribune, and he wrote on India in the 50s. And then in the Grundrisse, there's this great collection called Pre-Capitalist Economic Formations, which is what we're going to read that kind of in full. And then that should get us probably to about that midway point, or partially through like the end of May, maybe. And then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to move into the later stuff, Capital, selections from all 3 volumes of Capital. And then in the very end, some of his works in the 1880s on, for example, Russian communes and things like that. So, and I guess as well, the big one I should mention is Marx's ethnological notebooks, which is showing him actually engaging with, for example, Morgan's work on the Iroquois in the U.S. So,
wow, that sounds amazing, actually. Wow, and it sounds like something that people could get in on at different points during the year without, feeling like they absolutely had to have the previous content, even though it does build on it. I mean, I would recommend people going through the whole year, but they could come in if they miss the first month or whatever and still.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, that's one of the major differences from the reading group last year, which is when we were going through Capital, very slowly. It's if you came in the middle, I mean, it would be fine, you could just read the portions on your own or watch the videos and come in the middle. But it'd be like, oh, well, they're in like section 3 of chapter 2 or something. It's kind of strange that I'm just joining now. But with this, we're going to be dealing with a lot of different texts. So kind of, if you're like, well, I can't make any of the February session, so I can come in March. That's great. You're probably going to come in and learn all about, the German ideology, which is what we'll be starting there in March. So yeah, folks can join at multiple points. I agree. I think kind of one of the goals of the course is to see how Marx's thought on non-capitalist societies changes through time. So to really get that experience of it, to attend, from in theory the beginning to the end, you'd get that whole narrative of how that changed throughout his life, and really actually experience it yourself. Because one thing about this is we actually read the text together in the sessions. It's a strange reading group in that regard. So we don't require any outside reading. But yeah, so like I said, if you can make it, you can come and experience the kind of that full trajectory of Marx on non-capitalist societies. But if you can only make a few, you're not going to get lost.
Yeah.
They don't string together. Yeah, it's not like we're reading Capital like we were last year. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if people want to get those sessions on Capital from last year, we have them in our store. We're working on a transcript. But at this point, we do have the video sessions. And so I would encourage people to do that. It's a really quite, in-depth, rather meticulous treatment of it, which it deserves. And the Maurin Academy has a strong interest in people understanding economics, basically. And this
yeah,
is, this was our major contribution from last year and this year with non-capitalist economies, which goes along very well with Miriam Dominguez's class that's going on right now on the gift. So people should be aware of that as well. I just have one more question, which I think would be good for people to hear. Like, how do you see this content fitting in with the rest of what the Maurin Academy does, and why? Can you tell folks like would you say that we study these concepts?
I guess first I want to mention, why we did Capital or why Marx at all, right? Part of it is Marx to this day, right? According to at least most scholars, right, I would agree, I guess, is like the preeminent theorist of capitalist society, right? So that was our reading for our reasoning, at least my reasoning, I guess, for going through Capital Volume 1. And now kind of really this reading group now arises from some of the questions that were raised from that intensive reading of Capital Volume 1 about, if we live in a society where all these social relations are mediated by value, where who does what, when, where, why, and how is largely determined by some abstract concept, right, as opposed to by the individuals themselves, why is that the case? And what might it look like in a society where that isn't the case? Right. So we hit the why is that the case? That's Capital. You can, either you can watch the videos, read the book, or the transcripts, right? But what does that look like, in a society where we are not dominated by this notion of value that Marx identifies? And that really links in, I think, with the Maurin Academy's kind of tripartite mission of, we've got these three categories from Peter Maurin: cult, cultivation, and culture, right? Cult, religion, or we might think about this as meaning, what gives people meaning in their lives. Cultivation, we can think about agriculture and environment, and then culture, we can think about, I guess I would just say culture, or social, our social formations, or the way we are organized socially, things like politics and so forth. So, in a capitalist society, right, our relations with nature are partially structured by the political economy, right? When we think about, what's the value of that land, even contained in that statement, right, is a presupposition of living in a capitalist society. So if we didn't, how would that relation to nature change? The things that give us meaning, or how meaning is determined, how the worth of something is kind of set socially. How is that different in a society that isn't, a capitalist one? So that's kind of the way those things interlink is, what is the meaning? What is the relations of nature? And then what does the social organization look like outside of capitalism? Partly because, at Maurin, we've all, agreed that our contemporary social formation is ultimately bad for all three of those things.
Mhm.
It has produced a crisis of meaning, giving rise to things like, ethno-nationalism. It's wrecked the environment. We've got, rampant climate change, as well as an array of other cascading environmental problems. And then we've got a social formation where we've got, constantly folks who have, we have a crisis of homelessness. We've got folks who maybe have a lot of material wealth, but they don't actually have monetary wealth. So that creates strange issues. We have crises of overproduction, right? Like the fact that someone should lose their livelihood because right? We have an abundance of things is a strange concept
Mhm.
that's really particular to our social formation. So things like this is, I don't know, I feel like that was a winding answer, but hopefully I touched on several parts that
Yeah.
folks would find interesting. So
You sure did. And I just think it's worth saying these types of things over and over again because, what we're doing is a little complex in the sense that we're trying to put several things that seem like in our
Mhm.
society, they're often taken as very discrete. You can, examine one, you don't have to think about the others. We're trying to bring these things together because the problems that we have require that we think at multiple levels and that we see the connections amongst things. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And I'm encouraging people, go ahead, click on the links below. Basically, I'm going to put the Patreon link there. You can join this group and everything else that the Maurin Academy does by joining us at the Worker Scholar or Salt of the Earth level. Either one will get you into Jacob's sessions, and it's a pretty good deal at the Worker Scholars, $5 a month, and you get an awful lot that you can choose from. So I hope to see you there. I will be there, and I'm really looking forward to it, Jacob.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Lori. And the last thing I was going to say is just to kind of reiterate the earlier point Lori said, where if you're interested in these kind of topics, I really do also suggest that you check out Miriam Dominguez's course that's going on right now, because gift societies ultimately are a non-capitalist social formation, right?
Right, right.
And so these things loop into one another. There's a sense, like Lori said, in which we read these things together, we put these diverse topics in one bucket because that's what's required. We don't just need Wendell Berry. We don't just need Karl Marx. We don't just need, the Pope, right? We need all three of these folks synthesized in some form of new ideas, creative strategies or practices. So,
Right. Lots of different ideas can be brought to bear, and we need to get past our tendency to be exclusive and say, nope, not that. I'm on team A, you're on
right.
team B. It's time for
Yeah.
us to stop, and part of growing up intellectually, psychologically, and emotionally, which I feel like our society needs to do, is getting over that. So we're here to help you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
All
So
right. Well, thank you so much, and I'll look forward to doing this class with you again.
perfect. Thanks a lot,
All
Lori.
right. All right.
Bye
Take
bye.
care.